Okay, our next speaker is the bravest, most upfront defender of our freedoms at the moment. His speeches in Parliament have been outstanding, forthright and truthful, something that is hard to find at times. Hence, he faces much ridicule and opposition from all parties. This poor guy has to go into the lion's den constantly, and if we think being eaten by lions is bad, the constant badgering and torment he faces when surrounded by idiots must be absolutely horrid. I find it at schools too. Let's not go into that. We honour and praise him for boldly and strongly defending what is true, decent and imperative in the crazy world in which we find ourselves. Please welcome our Victorian Freedom Senator who flew in from Canberra last night to be here tonight, Senator Bevic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. You were very kind to me. Yes, I flew in last night from Canberra. I was in the lion's den as was described. And I tell you what, it is a lion's den, or it's a pit, is what it is. It's not an enjoyable place. I'll just be kind. It's definitely not an enjoyable place. But I'll tell you a bit of a story about Canberra. When I first went to Canberra, when I first went there, I was a little bit nervous. I was like, oh, I'm going to be around a place of learned people. There's such intelligent men and women. How am I going to fit in? I get there, and after a few days, I'm just thinking, are you serious? Is this who's running the country? Is this it? My goodness. So what I want you to take away from this is this simple message. Don't think that you can't do it. Don't think that you're not able to go to our nation's capital and be a leader and do good things to our country. Because I think one of the biggest problems that we have right now, as I live and breathe, is the career politician. The days of the career politician has to end. I'll tell you why. These guys, they come out of potentially university or high school, I don't know. They get a job at one of the big parties, be it Labor or Liberal or one of the other parties in the coalition or the Greens or whatever it is. They work their way up the food chain, bide their time, wait for a safe seat, get elected, and then they go and lord over you. They never have a real job. They never have the experience that you have living in the suburbs, paying bills. Maybe you miss a couple of bills here and there, but the point is you've lived a real life. And that's the kind of people that we need to be going into Canberra. Real people with real issues, with real experience to represent their area, their community, their state, their country. Not the career politician who has known nothing but politics. And that's what most of them are. Not all of them. There are good, decent, hardworking, honest, smart people in Canberra. But unfortunately, they are outnumbered by the idiots. Outnumbered. So, what I'm about to say today, it could potentially get me censored. Censored on Facebook, on YouTube, on X, formerly known as Twitter, if the Labor government gets its way. That's what might happen. I might get censored, and that's not right. So this proposed Combating Misinformation and Disinformation bill will give the government power, but more importantly, this is the key, more importantly than giving the government power to censor, it's going to give the bureaucracy the power to decide what is true and what must be silenced. The bureaucracy. I'll come back to this. Now, for those who don't know, if you don't know this, I'm about to tell you, I'm about to shatter your world. Probably not your world, but I'm about to shatter some people's world. Now, this bill was first proposed by the Liberal Party. No. This is not a Labor Party bill. The idea for this comes from Scott Morrison's government under a guy called Paul Fletcher, who was the communications minister at the time. Now, thankfully, the bill didn't proceed under the Liberal Party, but here we are, 1 year later approximately, and the Labor Party has resurrected this bill, and now they're going to attempt to pass it. And I'll be honest with you, they have the numbers to pass it. So if we're going to get it overturned or stopped in its tracks, I should say it's going to take a whole bunch of effort from all of you here and from your friends and family. Now, what does this prove? It just proves one thing, that the Labor Party and the Liberal Party are two wings on the same bird. That's what they are. Two pigs on the same bird, but the similarities, they don't end there. They don't end there. I'll give you a few more examples. The Voice, okay, The Voice. Now, the Labor Party wants to constitutionally enshrine the Voice, but the Liberal Party says, no, we don't want to do that. We're so different. We'll just legislate it instead. Same thing, buddy. It's the same thing. Another example, net zero. They both want net zero. They both do, except Labor says we'll do it in X way by X date. And the Liberal Party or the coalition comes along and say, don't worry, we'll do it in Y way by Y date instead. It's the same thing. Labor wants to send us broke today, and the Liberal Party will send us broke next week. Same thing. I'll give you one more example. Globalist organizations. They all take their marching orders from globalist organizations and institutions. Big tech, big food, big pharma, big war. All of those. The UN, the WEF, the WHO, and all the others. They all have their sticky little fingers in our government's policy. All of them. Labor or Liberal, doesn't matter. Now, if this bill passes, big tech companies, they could be, and probably will be fined millions of dollars if they don't gag you, the average Australian, if they don't gag you. Now, misinformation and disinformation should not be combated with censorship or threats of big fines. That's not how you do it. It should be combated with correct information. Correct information, supported by evidence, by data, and by reason. Thank you. Following this, there should be an open debate and a discussion in the public square. That's what should happen. But you know what? Social media is the public square now. That is the public square, the modern day public square. So you don't counter incorrect speech with censorship. But what can you do with censorship? What can you do? I'll tell you what, you can control the narrative. That's what you can do. And ultimately, that's what this bill is about. It's about controlling the narrative of the day, whatever that might be at that time. Now, former US President John F. Kennedy once said, and I'll quote him verbatim, he said, "A nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that is afraid of its people." That's what he said, and he was right. He was right. Now, the government knows one thing. It knows one thing. It knows that people have the power. That's what it knows. And this bill helps them keep one step ahead of the people. Now, social media, it's taken power from government and, more importantly, from the establishment. That's what it's done. The government and the establishment, they hate the idea that any one of you can become influential simply by pulling out the phone in your pocket and writing something online that's going to be seen by many people. That's what they're really afraid of, that power. Now, anyone who has read 1984 by George Orwell knows full well that this legislation will embolden ACMA, the Australian Communications and Media Authority, who will, by default, become Australia's own version of the Ministry of Truth. Who's read 1984? Show of hands, anyone? Or at least heard about it? Most of you. Okay, good. If you haven't read it, have a read. It's very interesting, and it really shows us, in artistic form, where we could be heading. So ACMA will then go on to have the power to decide what is true and what is not true, obviously. So digital platforms, they will censor in response to threats of fines, and obviously, it's going to inhibit your ability to have free and frank discussions. That much is clear. Now, this is an example of something. It's an example of what President Trump calls the deep state. An example of that, whereby faceless bureaucrats behind the scenes have a massive influence on the direction of this nation. Massive influence. You can't vote these people in, you can't vote these people out. And soon they'll have the power to silence you. And I think it's very wrong what they're doing. Now, it doesn't matter who you elect. It doesn't matter. One day it could be Miss Albanese and tomorrow it could be Mr. Peter Dutton. Could be. The bureaucracy, however, the faceless men and women, they stay the same. Thank you, sir. They stay the same. They do not change. They sit there 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years entrenched. Unfortunately, and this is the big problem here, we have elected members who lack the courage to drain the swamp, or rather the billabong in our case. They don't have the courage. And that's one of the reasons why Australia keeps marching down the same path, election after election after election. What changes? Nothing changes. Nothing changes. One party might have a different view on some small local policy. Another party might have a different view about that same small local thing. But the big ticket things, we just keep marching in the exact same direction. Exact same direction. Now, this bill, obviously, as Morgan said, it excludes professional news, so free kick to legacy media. Why does it exclude professional news? Because they can easily control what they print and say. They can't control what you print and say, though. Educational institutions, but I like to call them indoctrination centres. No worries there. No worries there. Yeah. And obviously the government, or I like to say propaganda. Propaganda is excluded from the government. It's a clear double standard. I mean, you can see that. It's one rule for us and another rule for them. Now, I think it's un-Australian and it's not the right approach. It's not the right approach at all. And that's putting it mildly, putting it very, very mildly. Now, the powers in this bill will apply to mis- or disinformation that is reasonably likely to cause or contribute to harm. And the previous speaker went through all of those, so I won't go through those again. But it's very loose in its scope. It's very open, but that's the whole point of it, because now it's up to the interpretation of whoever is in charge of it at that time. So they can chop and change it as they wish. Now, censoring speech, it's not the answer. We all know that. It's not the answer. Sunlight is the best disinfectant for a bad idea. Sunlight. Some examples, okay? Once upon a time, slavery was an accepted practice from the governments of the day. White Australia was the government policy, and women were forced to retire from the public service once they were married, and they weren't even allowed to vote for a while there. There are probably many other examples from history, from norms, historical norms, that at the time were widely accepted, but now we don't tolerate or accept it. Now things have changed. Why? Because people were able to freely express their opinion. They were not censored. That's why they were able to organise, to lobby the government and to challenge authority, which is why these injustices are now gone. But when you give the government the power to clamp down on what you can say, who knows what that could lead to? It probably won't be good. Now, Australia, we're not the only country implementing these kinds of laws at the moment. We're not. Many other countries are doing so at the same time. Now you've got to wonder, is it coincidence or is it by design? Is it coordinated? I don't know. I don't have the answer, but it's something that I would like to be able to discuss. One day I might not be able to discuss that. Now, this is the biggest attack on free speech in Australia in my lifetime, and probably many of yours as well. Now, Labor's Ministry of Truth, it would make George Orwell turn in his grave if he heard about it. It absolutely would. Now, this is the problem with wokeness. This is the problem. Everyone must look different, but we're all required to think the same. Now, whatever happened to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? It says, and I'll quote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to impart information through any media, regardless of frontiers." The Declaration of Human Rights says that. But we all know that the government likes to take a whiz on that, don't we? As we've seen over the last few years. Now, here in Australia, the government wants one thing. It wants the power to label narratives, ideas, and things that it does not like. And obviously, the million-dollar question is this: who gets to decide? Who decides what is mis or disinformation? Is it going to be some conservative, benevolent a person who wants the best for Australia and stands by the principles of freedom, democracy, or free speech? Or is it going to be a woke activist who wants to push an agenda? Who's it going to be? From what I've seen, it's going to be a woke activist. That's what I think it's going to be. Now, any new legislation that is introduced must be designed like this. It must be designed as if the country will one day be run by a tyrant or a dictator. And if that legislation has a potential for misuse or abuse, then it should be put in a bin where it belongs. Yeah. That's how you need to design new laws. Now, let me ask you these questions. Is it misinformation to say there's only 2 genders? No. Is it misinformation to say that the world won't end in 10 years because of global boiling? Is it misinformation to say that people shouldn't be force injected by their government? Is it misinformation to say that Jesus rose from the dead? Is it misinformation to say that masks don't work? Is my speech tonight misinformation? Is it? Maybe it is one day. If this passes, maybe it is. Everyday Australians, we can see where this is going. It's going the way of the communists and the fascists. That's where it's going. So I'd like to say this to you out there. Yeah. Nothing changes. Nothing will change unless you force the change. You must force change to happen. And obviously you all here already take a greater interest in the political process than probably some of your peers or family and friends. So I urge you, and I'm sure you're already doing it, but if you're not, speak to your family, speak to your friends, bring them along next time, talk to them about this bill. And more importantly, I always say this and I'll say it again, nobody is coming to save you. Nobody is coming. Batman's not coming. Superman's busy, right? You've got to be the superhero yourself. You've got to put your hand up. You've got to say, I've had enough. You've got to say, I want to have my voice heard. You've got to contact your local member. And more importantly, next election, you've got to be there to help one of us, freedom-oriented conservative people, hand out how to vote cards for us, support us, talk to your friends about us, share our content on Facebook while you still can, share it, and get behind us, because I can't do everything. It's very difficult where I am right now. And even if it's as simple as posting something on my social media saying great work and sharing something, it really means a lot, and I really appreciate all of you that actually do that for me. Now, I'll leave you with this. Thank you, man. Thank you. Go out there and be your own superhero, and together we will make a better Victoria. Together we will save our country, and together we will make free speech free again. Thank you, ladies and gents.